all three things that I want to consider as part of my results. But for date terminated, there's two different things, two different values that I could use to make my results better. So here I just go into, if you remove those parentheses from this example right here, where it says and date terminated is null or date terminated greater than August 1st, if you remove those parentheses, it would look like this. Medical live event date greater than January 1st, date terminated is null. All of those would be grouped together as your first part of the SQL. Once you hit that or statement, that's a completely new condition. So if you have someone who has a date terminated greater than August 1st, because that has the or statement before it, it's going to pull, regardless of the benefit ID, regardless of the date, regardless of whether there's a date terminated or not. Well, if there's a date terminated in there. So I added a note in here that just always consider if you have all the basic components, you know that you have your where clauses in there for the specific filters that you want, and you're still not getting the right results, consider just regrouping your SQL or reformatting it or reordering it, and your results could change completely. Anyone have questions about formatting or filtering that you won't? It's very rare to see an analyst who won't need to use this. If you need to use multiple data sets or multiple values from different tables, you have to the very first rule is name the tables. You do that by assigning an ID or we use it an alias to the table, and it's just an acronym. My suggestion is that you come up with a system to use the same acronym for each table every single time. What you'll find is some analysts will use employee F date and they'll name it A. Problem is if you go to use employee F date in a SQL a month down the road, and you want to grab pieces of that SQL from this one that you just wrote, it may not be A in your new SQL, and you'll have to rename everything. You'll have to reassign all your aliases. So an easy way to prevent that from having to happen is just assigning the first letter of each word in the table name as the acronym. By doing this, you can have the same ID every single time, and you can use it interchangeably in different SQLs. So here you can see an example of a table that I named. One thing to keep in mind is once you've named a table, you need to name all of the data points throughout the entire SQL. In the select statement and the where statement, once that table has an ID, any column belonging to that table needs to also have that ID. And you do that by having the ID name or the ID with a period and then the column name. So EED dot first underscore name is the way to do that. One thing I didn't mention that was in a few slides ago is that whenever you have a table name or a column name, if there's a space in it, you have to replace the space with an underscore. That doesn't apply to character or numeric values that you're searching for. So let me back up a little bit. So right here, if this was medical health, for example, it would have medical space health with the single quotes around it. If you're using single quotes and you're doing like equal to a certain data field, then that's fine, or a certain value, then that's fine. You can have spaces in your single quote. You cannot have spaces whenever you're using a column name or a table name. Does that make sense? So the next thing that you want to do when you're using multiple tables is always remember, number one, assign your ID, and number two, you have to separate them with a comma. And what that does is it tells the SQL to continue looking for another table. Once there's no further comma, it's going to expect there to be a where. So after the CE, because I don't have an additional comma, the next thing it's going to expect to see is a where. If you don't have a where there, you'll get an error. So when we go into the errors, you'll see one of the common errors that you have is you may have multiple tables and you forgot to include a comma between two of them. So it's going to say where statement not where expected or something similar to that.
Because the table doesn't exist.
you've listed multiple tables, just keep in mind, again, you have to name every piece of data that you're searching for. So here we have employee F date, which houses first name, last name, and email address. And then here we have company employee, which houses the employee number. So I've assigned that ID to that one because that's where the table belongs, or that's the table that it belongs in. And then I've assigned EED to these three because that's the table that those belong. If you ever want to see results display for a single table, all the columns, then you can do a wildcard function, but you have to assign the wildcard function an ID too. Once you have multiple tables, you can't just do select star, because what that will do is it will freeze your info maker, and then you'll have to start over from scratch. So as soon as you add in a second table, immediately take out your select star statement. You don't ever want to have that in there. But what you can do is assign that wildcard an ID, like I did here. So we want to see employee number, and then we want to see all fields for the employee F date table. So I'm going to pull specifically the employee number, and that will be the first field that appears in your results. And then you'll have every single result from the employee F date table. The next rule of using multiple tables, before you ever run a query, make sure that you have a join to join the two tables together. You do that by adding an SSN join, because SSN in our systems is the common denominator in 99.9% of our tables that we use. So it's something that will always be there to use as a join. And what that does is it just tells InfoMaker that the participants that are in the employee F date table in this example are the same employees that exist in the company employee table. If you don't put that join in there, it's going to give you a result for every single person on every single on both of those tables, like every single combination that could exist. So if you have 100 people on employee F date, you have 100 people on company employee, you're going to get 10,000 results rather than 100. So if you don't have that join in there, it's going to crash your InfoMaker and you'll lose your results. Because InfoMaker is so finicky, it's always best before you click execute on your SQLs to always save what you're doing. Get into the habit of that because it will happen many times when you write a SQL and you'll create all these crazy codes and everything that you're doing, and then all of a sudden you run it and you forgot it one single SSN join and it crashes. Does that make sense? And then if you add another table in, the first thing you always do when you add another table in, before you put your select criteria that you want to add in, before you add any other where statements, add your SSN join. So in this second example here, I've added another table, the MCG data table, which houses eligibility information like master group, benefit group. It's equivalent to the other data tab in BW. So the MCG data table, when I added that, I had to add another SSN join. So I did where employee F date equal to MCG data SSN. So that's what multiple joins looks like. You'll notice here, and I'll get into this a little bit more as to why, but you'll notice here that you're always going to link all of your tables up to the first table that you listed. And that's for performance. If you do employee F date SSN equal to company employee SSN and company employee SSN equal to MCG data SSN, it will still work, but it's going to take a long time to run. So again, when you create an alias or when you add an ID to a table, when you're using multiple tables, you have to specifically assign that ID to your where statements as well. So in this case, if I want to see last name and I want to dwindle that down to only people with the last name of Smith, then you have to specifically state that last name belongs to the employee F date table. If you don't have that in there, you'll get an error. Because InfoMaker will not know where to look for that field, so it won't be able to filter. So here I've I put the specific error that you'll get. So if you ever see column ambiguously defined, just look through your entire SQL again and look to see where you're missing an ID. It can be in your select statement, it can be in your where statement, but somewhere in there you're missing an ID. The next thing we're going to go into is min and max functions. I'm not going to show you guys how to write them, but if you would like, I have some predefined ones that I've already created using the naming conventions and the ID naming conventions that I told you guys about, where it's the first letter of every single table, every single word in the table name. So I have max equals already created, a predefined list of them. If you'd like me to send them to you, just let me know and reach out and I can send them to you. I just want you to understand why you need max equals or min equals and when you would use them. And then when you get into SQL 201, you'll go into writing subqueries and how that works. So a max equal and a min equal or a max function, min function, it's basically a subquery to tell you that you want to see only the most recent data point for that participant or for that specific result that you're looking for. If you don't have a max equal in there, you'll see all historical results from beginning to end. So if you have an employee with 1,000 medical rows because they've had 1,000 life events, if you don't have a max equal in there when you run that, it's going to pull every single medical row that existed for that person. If you want to look at their most recent eligibility information, you want to insert a max equal to say, for this participant, this FSN, I want to see only the most recent eligibility information. So you would write it almost exactly as you would say it out loud. An example of a minimum clause is listed below. So you'll see the minimum and the maximum are exactly alike. The only difference is instead of saying max, you have min. And it's the same concept. So instead of seeing the most recent row, you're going to see the oldest record that exists. So say, for instance, your client wants to know what the original salary was for someone that we received upon implementation. You can write a select min equal, and then you'll pull the earliest salary record that existed for that participant to give them that result. There's oftentimes where you have to combine a min and a max statement. An example of that is for your address F-date table. So if everyone thinks about your address F-date, you want to look for the most recent record, you want to look for max F-date, but you want to look for the lowest key, or a key equal to 0. So you could either do select max F-date, which is the second part of this, and then include an address key equal to 0, or you can just do both a min and a max equal together, and what that does is it looks for the minimum address key available and the maximum effective date.
Well, not related to SQL, but why are there different keys for addresses?
It basically tells SQL, or it tells CW which one to display. And you can do historical information, or you can assign different keys to different people. So if you have a spouse who lives in Europe and then you have a participant who lives in the United States, some clients allow those different addresses to be reported to vendors. You can assign an address key to each person, so that way they can have their specific address sent to the vendors. It's a way for us to store multiple addresses with the same effective